Hey everyone, I'm Chase Elleby, attorney here at Joel Williams Law, and I'm going to speak with you briefly about identifying as much insurance as possible once you've signed up an auto wreck case. As most of y'all know, probably one of the most important documents to any auto wreck case is the police report, which gives you a ton of information that's necessary to pursue any claim. The most important information that we get from the police report is obviously the liability insurance information, as well as any uninsured or underinsured insurance information. And most of the time when our clients come to us, they have a copy of the police report, but if they don't, you can always go to buycrash.com and look up the report yourself and print it out and save it to your file. So once I have my hands on the police report, I'll send a letter of rep to the at-fault insurance company, which will be listed under the at-fault driver. It's also important to check to see if the driver of the vehicle also matches the owner of the vehicle, because if they're different, then I'll send a letter to the at-fault driver as well, requesting that he or she provide me with any information that they have for any other additional liability policy. Under Georgia law, the liability insurance typically follows the car, so that's why it's important to see if the owner is different than the driver. Then there might be another policy that you can stack on top of the insurance that's following the car. After the liability carrier gets the letter of rep along with the attestation, they will send the deck page, which will show the amount of liability coverage for the wreck. It's always important to look to see what the amount is, because usually if it's a higher amount, like say $250 or $500 in liability coverage, most of the time there's an umbrella policy that attaches to the auto policy. So you want to look out for that and request that information if you don't get it when you get the initial deck page. After evaluating the liability coverage, I turn my attention next to the UM coverage. Same with the liability coverage, I look at the police report to see what policy is listed on the vehicle that my client was riding in at the time of the wreck. When evaluating UM coverage, you also need to find out from your client the circumstances behind the wreck itself, meaning were they the driver, were they the passenger, whose car were they in, that sort of thing. If they were driving their own car, of course you want to send a letter of rep to their own auto insurance company to find out if they have UM coverage available to cover the case. If they were a passenger in the car, you'll want to send a letter of rep to the UM coverage that applies to the vehicle they were in, and also any UM coverage or auto insurance coverage that your client may have. Another important avenue of UM coverage is to determine whether or not a resident relative exception applies to your particular case. And by that I mean you want to find out from your client if at the time of the wreck they had any other family members living in the same household that had their own auto insurance policy. If they did, you'd want to send that insurance company a letter of rep as soon as possible. And to that point, with any UM coverage, it's extremely important that you put that insurance company on notice as soon as possible. The number one defense we see from any UM claim, especially when you're looking at UM on the resident relative side, is that they didn't have sufficient notice that there was a potential claim. And if they have that defense, then they can deny coverage. Okay, after we've sent out the letters of rep to the liability carriers and all the uninsured or underinsured motorist carriers, we then start to analyze the deck pages that we get in. With liability, it's pretty straightforward. You find out how much coverage there is, you see what the limits are, and you can go from there. With UM, it gets a little trickier. You have two types of uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage in Georgia, as most of you all know. It's either add-on coverage or reduced by coverage. And they are pretty much what they sound, right? So if you had an add-on policy for UM coverage, you just add that on top of the liability coverage. If you have a reduced by coverage or a traditional coverage, then you reduce the amount of UM coverage off of however much liability coverage there is. So for instance, if you have $100,000 worth of liability coverage and you have $100,000 worth of UM coverage that's a reduced by policy, then you effectively have no UM coverage. And much like the liability policies, you can also stack uninsured or underinsured motorist policies. So after you've gathered all the UM policies that could potentially apply to any case, you basically put them all together, determine whether or not they're add-on or reduced by coverages, so that way you get a full picture of how much total coverage is available. You can run into all sorts of issues with multiple UM policies that are add-on and reduced by, some that are your own, some that are resident relative. There's a handful of tests that are applicable to that situation to determine who is going to be priority in paying any claim. So for example, if you have a $25,000 liability policy, a $25,000 add-on UM policy that your client has, and then another $25,000 add-on policy from a resident relative, you'll have a total of $75,000 of coverage for that one car wreck. Of Of course, that's a pretty simple example, and as you can see, it can get really complicated when you have multiple policies and liability policies that may be applicable to a single wreck. Well, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this video. Of course, if you have any other questions or any comments, just let me know. You can email me at chase@gatrialattorney.com or give me a call at 404-389-1035.